Petersburg was a very segregated city when I was growing up here. As Sharon mentioned, I was born here, grew up here, and have basically lived here my whole life, except I had the good fortune to go up north to college, University of Michigan. So I got a little different perspective, which is important. So, growing up in St. Petersburg, as I said, it was very segregated. Black people were kept in a very subservient mode. Not only did black people have to ride in the back of the bus, but they had to live in a certain place in town. They could not go to the beaches, go swimming in the swimming pool. There was one marvelous swimming pool that was the spa pool we loved to go to. No blacks were ever allowed there. The public drinking fountains, of course, you know. In fact, in our own museum downstairs, there are two doors that I think were in the train station from Tampa. Is that?
They look in the doctor's office.
Oh, okay. It says, one of them says colored only, the other says white only. So if you were colored, you dare not go in the white door, and vice versa. So you get the picture. The schools were exceptionally bad. Of course they were segregated, but they were very inferior. The books were always secondhand, cast off, old, and the desks were dilapidated, and the buildings were not good. So in the 50s, some of the leadership in St. Petersburg, because of some complaints, decided we're going to make separate but equal schools. So they constructed a new high school, and this was supposed to be a gleaming example of a good school for black kids. It was better than they had, but still very separate and very actually unequal, because their facilities were just always second rate, and most people didn't care. I was fortunate when the civil rights stuff started to happen in the 60s. I was in my early 30s, and my kids were already in school, and I had some time, and I became friendly with some of the faculty and professors at this college that was just getting started here. It's now called Eckerd College, and it was Florida Presbyterian, remember? Anyhow, and that brought down some liberal professors, and it was my good fortune to talk to them and enlarge my circle that way. Besides, as I mentioned, I had gone to University of Michigan and had some exposure to black people being more than just servants. Because in St. Petersburg at the time, that's, if you were black, the only job you could have was as a maid, or as a garbage worker, or a porter maybe. And if some white person wanted you to work for them, and you were, say, a black man of 50, he would call you, "Hey boy, come here boy," to a black man of 50 or older. He was just a boy, he was nothing. And you know, that's how it was. And most of us in the beginning, it's what you grew up with, that was the way it was. But like I said, fortunately for me, I got some other influences into my life, so my eyes were beginning to open. So when the civil rights, well, first of all, President Kennedy in the early 60s tried to pass some legislation to equalize things, because Martin Luther King was preaching and people were becoming aware that everyone needed a chance. So television was out, and things were, even here, we got it very late, but so we became aware of what was going on. And so as I mentioned, President Kennedy and Congress at that time introduced some civil rights legislation. They couldn't get it passed. And then, of course, Kennedy was assassinated, and Lyndon Johnson became the president. Now, it's interesting, under his presidency, this civil rights legislation got passed. And it's especially interesting because, of course, he was a Southerner from Texas and had not been brought up, kind of like me in a way. He hadn't been brought up to these liberal ideas, but somehow he caught the spirit and he realized that our country had to change and had to improve. So, because he was a very dynamic leader and able to make the Congress go in the direction he thought was right, they did pass these civil rights laws in the mid-60s. So now, the thing, that's great, everything's going to be rosy, but it wasn't, because most people didn't know that there was anything different going on, and they didn't care. I mean, most of the white establishment, who of course were the people in charge. So things continued very much as they were. But fortunately, there were people like Dr. Martin Luther King and others who realized that now they had the opportunity, with the law on their side, to make a change. So I think I mentioned that I became friendly, involved with some of the people at Eckerd College, some of the professors, and they introduced me to others that were liberal-minded, and I met some of the leaders in the black community, because there were a few educated people in the black community even at that time. I met my friend, who became my friend, Bette Wimbish, who was a young black woman. She had gone to college, a black college. I forget the name of it right now. And her husband, Dr. Ralph Wimbish, who also was a college graduate. And at the time, there were two black doctors in town, Dr. Fred Alsop and his wife Edith, and Dr. Ralph Wimbish and his wife Bette. So they kind of made up the leadership of the black community. And I was fortunate to get to meet them. And now this legislation has been passed. So we decided that we were going to try to get it implemented. And that was not easy. I remember my husband Don and I went to a restaurant one time with Dr. Ralph and Bette Wimbish, and we sat at a bar, and now this is in the early 60s, just after this legislation had been passed. And we were going to have drinks, and then serve you and you, not you and you. Well, Don, my husband, said, excuse me, do you know that legislation has been passed? You're going against the law. You have to serve all of us. And he said, oh, I can't do that. I said, you better, Don said. And Dr. Wimbish stood up too, and the two of them, in a very polite, nice way, I have to add, they weren't aggressive. They said, call your boss, you gotta serve all of us. So, and they recite, Ralph knew the laws. He had it all down to him. He was a very intelligent man. Anyway, so, sure enough, we got served. That was one of the steps we took. We went to a lot of different restaurants because once they knew they had to do it, that broke the ice, so to speak. Then they did it. They knew they had to, and they served other black folks. It was very hard. I remember, here's another example of how difficult segregation was. When the teams, the baseball teams used to come to town, we had the Yankees and the Cardinals that were training here. And I remember, I think it was Jackie Robinson. I don't remember if it was him or some other black player in the early days when the teams took on a few black players. When they came to town, the teams, they would put the team up at one of the nice hotels, the Swanee or the Pennsylvania, or the Princess Martha, one of the good hotels. Well, the hotels would not take the black players. They didn't care what the owners said or what anybody said. Oh no, we don't take blacks in our hotel. So they couldn't stay. But Bet Wimbish and Ralph would put up these black players at their home. They had a pretty nice house in the black, of course in the black district, had to be in the black district. As educated and as cultured as they were, they had to live in a certain section too. And they couldn't go into a restroom somewhere either until after these laws were passed. And then each time it was like breaking the ice or proving that this was the law of the land. So it happened little by little. It was lucky that we had some leadership here, and some of us white people went along and tried to help things change. I remember that Ralph saying it's very important that we get the black community to vote. They got to vote. And the black community, although they were allowed theoretically to vote at this time, it was very difficult. There were often tests that were given to some people, not everybody, and at some time there was a poll tax. So if you were not well-to-do, if you were counting every penny, you didn't want to pay a tax to vote. And most of the 99 and 44% of the black community was at poverty level. Well, they could, I don't know if I mentioned it or not, I kind of forget if I mentioned what, but you know, the jobs were just maids. And did I say that they were maids and porters and very low pay? So it was very important for, I think Ralph was the president of the local National Association of Colored People, is that?
NAACP.
Yeah, yeah. And he was the local president, so he was up on a lot of these procedures, and he said, we've got to get people to vote. So Bet and I, she's black, I'm white, we marshaled as many people to help us as we could. I got my brother Sanford Goldman. Some of you might know Sanford, my brother. I don't know if you know Sanford. Well, he got out there to register people, and I'm registering people. But what the plan was, a black would go with the white, and we'd go down the neighborhoods. Now, I went on one side of the street with Bet, and my brother Sanford went on the other side of the street with Jim Sanderlin. I don't know if any of you know that name, but he was a young black attorney who came to St. Petersburg as a young man. He was from Boston, so he had experiences of freedom, and he had some relatives here. He wanted to live here, but he realized he needed to help change the community. So he was a terrific guy. He became the first black judge in this community. And by the way, Bet Wimbish, my friend, became the first black woman on the St. Petersburg City Council. But all this happened only after we got people registered to vote. So that was key, and they knew it. And it would really, when I think of it now, Bet and I would walk down one side of the street, and my brother and this black attorney, Jim Sanderlin, walked down the other side of the street, and we'd knock of the black community, and trying to coax these people to register to vote. And we'd cart them down to the place to register. We said, you gotta do it. They said, no, it's not gonna help, it doesn't matter. We said, it matters, you gotta do it. It's life or death, you gotta do it. So we did, we got a lot of people registered. And it was really felt very rewarded, because we felt like we were doing something. You know, that's a concrete something we were doing. And darn, it made the change. Oh, makes me cry. Oh. Anyhow, of course, all that happened, a lot of it because there was a lot going on. Dr. Martin Luther King and the others nationally getting people aware. And so all of it worked together to help these changes occur. I remember shortly after this, Coretta King came to St. Petersburg. It was, I think, in the 1966, I think it was. Coretta Scott King, oh, thank you. Coretta Scott King came to St. Petersburg to give a freedom concert. And she had a beautiful voice, by the way. She was a singer. And she sang songs that pertain and spoke pertaining to the civil rights movement. She was very inspiring, very beautiful, powerful woman in her own right. Anyhow, so all the black community were thrilled to have her. And after her speech at Pasadena Church, they wanted to have some kind of nice affair for her. So Bet, or I can't remember who, asked if Don and I would have a reception at our home for Mrs. King. And we said, sure, we'll have it. So it we had a very nice home and a very nice neighborhood, Pelham Road off of Park Street. I don't know if any of you know that. Still a lovely neighborhood. And so we had a beautiful, large reception for her, and many of the black community came. But some people weren't so happy about it. In fact, there had to be 3 police cars on our street because there was agitation. They didn't like it that in this white neighborhood we were having a party for black people. So this was not, I was now no longer living across from Sharon Blue. I was now married and had another house. Anyway, because Sharon and I grew up as children, I was across the street from her. But now I'm married and have a house. It was a lovely party, and I have to mention one small thing. We had a 2-story living room, and our bedroom looked down over the living room. And when there was a party or anything special going on, our kids, my daughter Terry, and our 2 boys would be up in the bedroom looking down, seeing what was going on. And so anyway, it was a successful affair. Nothing bad happened, everything good. And afterwards, Mrs. King said, I wish that you could come to Atlanta and to meet Martin and meet my family. And my kids would love to have a place to look down when we have affairs like you do. Anyhow, she invited us to come, and unfortunately, very shortly thereafter, Dr. King was assassinated. So we never got to meet him. But we were fortunate to meet her, and it was inspiring to a lot of us to see that people cared and people would march for what they believed in. And that leads me to the last little part of what I want to tell you about, and that is shortly after Dr. King's assassination, the sanitation workers in St. Petersburg decided they wanted to protest their working conditions, and they went on strike. By the way, the sanitation workers were mostly known as garbage collectors, and they were all black. There was no white sanitation workers. So it was an all-black group. And believe it or not, their pay was much less than the other city workers in St. Petersburg. They had no perks, no benefits, and their conditions were just very minimal, to say the least. So, now this was a time when people were becoming aware the Civil Rights Act had been passed. So they decided they were going to march and ask for better pay and a day off or whatever. I don't remember all the things they were asking, but they wanted to do it peacefully, and that in the spirit of Dr. King. That was their main consideration. So a lot of the faculty at Eckerd marched with them, because I was friendly with some of them. I also marched. We formed up around, I think it was around where the Tropicana field is, but there was no Tropicana field, but somewhere around there we formed up. And we could march down First Avenue South. And the theory was to go down First Avenue South to 5th Street, turn left a couple of blocks, and go to City Hall and protest in front, and make the pitch in front of City Hall. Well, the police very nervous about the whole thing. They didn't want this peaceful march to, they allowed it on First Avenue South, but for some reason, they didn't want the people to go in front of City Hall. They were afraid. So and as I remember, Don, tell me if I don't have it exactly right. As I remember, the marches went on for several nights. I mean, it wasn't just one night. They'd get to a certain place and want to turn, and the police would stop them.
And some of them were taken to the police station in a paddy wagon.
Right.
Including Jane and the whole bunch of them.
Well,
they drag them there, and then they let them go at the police station. They didn't
hold
them there.
But they just wouldn't let the march continue to speed for some reason. Well, this went on for quite a while, but somehow, I don't know who it was, what attorney, but somebody got the message into the police force that they were not within the law, that these people had a right to go and march all the way to the steps of City Hall, which is all they wanted to do. So this one night I was with them, and it started out when we got to City Hall very peacefully. One of the preachers said a prayer, and there were placards about the requests that the workers were making. You know, we want $5 an hour, or $4.50 an hour. I don't know, it's some amount which would seem pretty small to us now. I don't remember what it was. And some other requests. Well, this was starting out good. I was there, Don was there. All of a sudden, some black radicals, because there was a group of very young, strong, radical guys who were not with the sanitation workers, but they started hollering, "Burn, baby, burn. Let's burn this place down. Let's burn City Hall. Let's burn the mayor's house. We're gonna get what we want. Let's burn." And I think I have a picture. It was in the paper. I have a picture here. He made a copy. But here's me. I stood up. This is me when I was 34 or whatever. And I stood up and I said, stop it. This is not what we're marching for. We're not marching to destroy. We're marching to build something, to make something better, not to tear down. So, anyway, these radicals, because I guess in every group there's often radicals. These radicals, this Joe Waller, who later called himself Ichitella, start coming toward me, raising their fist and saying, "Shut up, lady, shut up. Who are you?" And I was a little scared, to tell you the truth. But at that very moment, these garbage workers, sanitation workers, these big, terrific guys that I've been marching with, formed a shield around me, and they wouldn't let those radicals near me. And it was a very nerve-wracking, but in a way, it proved to me that there's good people and strong people, and we have to stand up, and things will come out okay. And we did. We stood up, and we were positive, and by the way, the workers got a lot of the things they requested after days of protesting, and gradually things changed. So, excuse me, I don't know why I'm such a crybaby. But it was just a very exciting and dramatic time, and I'm glad I was part of it.